Hi and welcome to the Process Simulator Autodesk Edition. I'm going to demonstrate building a simple model with Process Simulator Autodesk Edition using the Asset Browser. In Process Simulator, we have a ribbon within Microsoft Visio 2016 and 2019, which allows you to add elements and details to your flowchart within Process Simulator. In addition, we have the Asset Browser. We have added the 5 additional shapes: activity, buffer, entity, resource, and storage to help assist in building your simulation model using assets from the Asset Browser. You should have access to system assets, user cloud assets, and if you wish, you can also connect to your Autodesk Vault and select assets from the Vault. In this model, I am going to build a simple process where I have an entity, which is what drives your simulation, called bar stock. I'm going to add a bar stock and have it go through a lathe, through a degreaser, be visually inspected, and then if it passes inspection, I will have it go on to a process called attach bearings, or it will go to a rejects bin. In this process, I am also going to have resources, a lathe operator, a part inspector, and a bearing assembler. Let's get started. I'm going to add an entity by dragging that out onto my layout. I'm then going to go to my user assets and drag out the desired assets that I wish to my layout. You can rename these if you wish. Alright, so these are what we call activities inside a Process Simulator. I'm using assets, the lathe, degrease, visual inspection, attach bearing, and the reject bin. I'm going to go ahead and connect those. In Process Simulator, we utilize Visio's auto glue function to be able to connect our shapes inside of this diagram. So I am going to connect the assets. My work unit is an entity. When I connect that to an activity, such as the asset lathe, it draws a connection arrow with an open arrow pointer, which indicates that this is an arrival. So my work unit will arrive at my lathe. Connecting an activity to an activity has a filled-in arrow, and that represents a route. How we go from activity to activity. If you notice, as I leave Visual Inspect, I route to 2 different locations, or 2 different activities. Process Simulator, by default, will separate those routes into 50-50. I will change that at this time. I will right-click and open up the properties. These properties can be left open for every element within your simulation model. I'm going to come down to the percentage and change this to be 97%. Because I'm changing that, I will also have to change this other 50% route so that I don't have an error. I will change this to be 3%. To represent 3% of my visually inspected parts will be rejected. One last thing, I want to change this to be a bar stock. So now I have my basic flow of my part. I'm going to also add a route to exit. The last thing I want to do in this quick and simple simulation model is let's add our resources, the individuals that we're going to help process our parts at all of the different workstations. Now, because I want to have greater detail, I'm going to change the names of these min assets that I've dragged out. I'm going to call this first one a lathe operator. I then will have a part inspector, and I'm going to call this guy a bearing assembler. All right, now that I have these three resources, I now need to use them in the model. So I'm going to go to my lathe, and in its properties, for the properties of the lathe, if you see here, I have the activity name lathe. I'm going to make sure that I'm using the lathe operator. I'll also use the lathe operator to route from the lathe to degrease. So I will change that right here. I also want to use him at the degrease and to route to the visual inspect. At visual inspect, I'm going to use the part inspector. As well as routing to attach bearing and to the rejects bin. And at the attach bearing, I will use the bearing assembler. Now that I have my model built, I'll go ahead and save it. I'm going to call this my brochure model good to sync. After you've saved your model, you can simulate it. Noting that each element in your simulation model, your entities, your activities, buffers, resources, storage, any asset that you've brought in will have simulation properties like you see over on the right-hand side. Those properties allow your simulation to have interdependencies and be able to take into consideration variability as you simulate. As we simulate, we can see our entity, the bar stock, flow through our process. The resources that have been assigned to their various activities turn green while the model is simulating. We can see total exits and the average cycle time for our bar stock as it flows through the lathe all the way through attached bearings. We can use this model to run different experiments, run different scenarios, and be able to address different KPIs that we may be interested in. Once your model has been saved, you can then come up to the Autodesk section in the ribbon where, if you notice, we have the asset browser selected. That's why we see it over here on the side. And we can go to Sync Workflow. Process Simulator Autodesk Edition allows you to sync to AutoCAD or sync to Inventor, or we can also export a file that can then be opened up inside of AutoCAD or Inventor, and you can pull the assets that you used from Process Simulator into Inventor or AutoCAD so that you can place them where you'd like and continue to expand upon your Inventor document or your AutoCAD drawing. So I'm going to sync with Inventor. It opens Inventor and pulls in the assets from the factory design utility. The nice thing about this is it also pulls in all of the factory properties associated with each one of these graphics. I hope this demo has been helpful and that you have a great day.